Well, hello everybody, Larry Young here again with another segment of OLaMan Living Life with Purity. And today I want to take a moment to sort of set up for a series of podcasts I'm going to do next week with Alex Fiato, who is going to be coming back in with some new information and some very, very interesting and timely details about what is going on in the world right now, and also how we're basically just repeating the cycle of what we went through 100 years ago. So let me give you a little bit of background on this here, and I hope that some of you take the ball and run with it here and do a little more investigating on your own over the weekend and next week when you've got some idle time. I think you're going to find this peculiarly interesting. And I use the word peculiar for a reason because of certain friends who live in a little town that name. I think you're going to find this very much on point. So, history repeats itself. And why do we say that? Well, one of the things is that humans are not that complicated. We're not that evolved as we may take pride in ourselves as being. Yes, we do some wonderful things, but we come with a set of fallibilities about our life and how we go about it. And one of those things is we don't live that long. And we're living longer than we ever have at any point in history. It used to be very, very common that people would die in their 30s or 40s from consumption or tuberculosis or other diseases would take them out. We've always had cancers. It seems we just have more prevalent ones now, or they're diagnosed. But the nature of our beings used to come and take us away much sooner than what we do these days. So now if somebody dies in their 40s going to their 50s, they say, oh, far too soon. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, says, wow, what a wonderful long life he had. So it's a matter of perspective. And one of the things is that as we go through life and we see the changes and we see what goes in our cultural, societal work, as we get older, we're able to assemble more of these facts and experiences and come to a real conclusion and at least a better estimation of what it is that's happened and what it is that we're doing. So many times the youthful perspective doesn't have this body of knowledge and experience to make such judgments, but they have to make their decisions based upon an expectation, some sort of, whether it be hope or some sort of direction they see things going, and they want to plan for that eventual outcome that they see in their mind. It may not be what has happened historically, or they may not understand that people have tried this in the past and it didn't work, or what the lessons really were, because their familiarity, their experience isn't quite there yet to give them this perspective. But older people typically do. And this is why it's very important to talk to our older members of our community and our families especially, and pick their brains and ask them what they think, because many times they will shut down and say, well, it's none of my business, it's your world now, you take care of it. But there's lots of good things to gain from the wisdom of people that have lived, and they've lived a long life. So I'm benefiting from that right now in my own life. My mother is 99 years old, sharp as a tack, but she has great perspective on what the world and this country went through, and she has an opinion on how people are reacting to now and whether or not it is valid, or if it's an immature, or if it's a reasoned response based upon her experience. So hopefully that wasn't too convoluted for folks to follow. But anyway, so back during let's go all the way back to like the 1830s. The 1830s, there were a lot of people that were emigrating to the United States. A lot of these folks weren't really immigrants so much as they were in the pattern of still being settlers at that time. The the Great West and the Midwest was still being settled at that time. We needed people to come in and to basically civilize this rough world that the United States and North America was at that time. And so they came in with a different thinking. It wasn't more about immigrating to a place that's already established. It's going to a place that's going to give them hope and an opportunity for them to go in and build and create something for themselves and to eke out a living. Because, as many folks may know, in the 1840s, I think it was the Great Potato Famine, and that caused a lot of pain and anguish for folks in Ireland. So a lot of these folks immigrated to the United States, and they brought with them not only their own traditions and their dialects and things like this and their understandings, but they also brought with them primarily their Catholic faith. And this caused a lot of problems for the Masonic-type Protestants that were already settling this North American continent. It wasn't primarily the Catholic groups coming in. They were primarily more Protestant views and with a Masonic tone to them. So, and that's the guys that settled the country. All of our forefathers, pretty much their organizing society was that of the Masons. Washington was a Mason. I don't know if Jefferson was, but all these guys, they kind of huddled together in these groups, and one of these formative groups was the Masons. So had differing ideas than the Catholics, and this is going to be dealt with in decades and centuries to come after that. And we've been putting that through. We've got Masonic influence at the Vatican itself has been invaded by these thoughts, and these are ideologies. And people don't change that much, but the ideologies do throughout history. And so when these new arrivals were coming in the 1840s, 1850s, and all like that, it caused a lot of concern for the Masonic establishment that was already here in the North American continent. And they wanted to put down this Catholic nuance, this Catholic ideology that was being injected into the system. And what they did was what they're doing today is they name-called and tried to dehumanize these people more so. And they were trying to put forth the standard that Catholics did not have the ability or the capability within them because they were a lesser being, that they were less than your typical whites, your Anglos that came out of the Slavic regions of Europe. And so this was basically pre-thinking or predetermined type ideology that later on, when the communist parties came along and the communist ideologies came along, that they were able to move that pain and the diminution, I guess is what it is, or trying to devalue these Catholic new arrivals as being less than worthy of attention. They weren't quite fully developed humans in that regard. They were less than white. Now, they had already established at that time that blacks, the slaves, were less than human. This was a lot of their virtue signaling they were able to give themselves, that they were going to save the black people, or as they came to be called, because they had to come up with a name to use for their polite society. So they referred to them as the Ethiopians. And at this time in our culture, they were arriving at 5 different race classes that were going on. And primary above them, what they held in the highest regard, were the Slavics, the German type, maybe the French coming in. They were brought in as well. That they were considered to be the highest in esteem and capability. And then there was declining after that. I mean, the Jews were in there. They were downline. Catholics were downline. Obviously, Irish were less than white. Jews were obviously less than white because they got into the skin color range that came at them. And you would think that the lowest level that they would have thought about was the Ethiopians. Nope. The lowest member of this 5-member ranking of races was considered the Southern Italians, the Sicilians. At that time, they said there was no hope for the Sicilians, the Southern Italians, to be merged into any kind of society or culture, that they were not able to acclimate or assimilate. So at that time, the worst of the worst were the Southern Italians. So it kind of goes against things, because one of the things that they couldn't do is they couldn't subrogate the Italians to a slave class. So they elevated the slave class, the Ethiopians, in their regard, to give them higher ranking, that they valued their slaves more so than they valued the Southern Italians coming in. So imagine being a family with a great wealth of history and culture, bringing over all your food and your recipes and things like that, and everybody thinks that you're no good. Everything changed when pizza came around, but that didn't happen for another 80 years or so. But so we've got history repeating itself because we don't quite live long enough to learn from our lives and to put it into practice for the younger people. Because the younger people, when they come along, they always tell the older people to sit down and shut up. I got this. And so the older people, not wanting to cause storms or whatever in the discussion, they politely sit down and say, well, I guess you know what's best. I'll just go over here and wait to die, type of things. Well, this all kind of carried on and brought about a different form of thinking that went through up until like the 1900s. And then the early 1900s, things got to be really contentious between the Protestants and the Catholics, who actually survived and began to thrive. So the signs in the New York storefronts and businesses in New York and Boston and other places like that were being highly settled at that time. It used to be they would have signs in the doorways that said, no Irish considered, no Irish need apply. And the term Irish was used as sort of a blanket coverage for Catholic. And so these Protestant business owners didn't want anything to do with the Catholic principled people or thinkers, because one, they thought so lowly of them by their own training and lack of regard for these people, thinking that they were, on the border of being less than human. And they also had concerns about what their allegiance was to. Would they be allegiant? Would they give their patriotism to their country, or would they give it to the Pope at the Vatican and Rome? Which would they follow first, and which one would they follow more completely? And so this left a lot of problems in their minds, and it's also then filtered through into our political lives today. We get this still today. Bobby Kennedy, RFK Jr., being questioned for being a Catholic. Joe Biden was questioned for being a Catholic, but he slammed the door shut by being a proponent of abortion. Nancy Pelosi, the same thing. They tried to change the discussion about Catholics, oh, I'm not that kind of Catholic, I'm this Catholic. So, and this sort of appeased a lot of the Protestants and these angry folks on the left side of the arguments. And now we've got people, even in the Catholic Church now, are joining that, and it's messed up, but we'll talk about our priest situation a little bit later on. But so there was a guy that came along in the early 1900s, and his name was John Knoll, N-O-L-L. He became Archbishop John Knoll of the Fort Wayne South Bend Diocese. He's the guy that brought along the publications of the Sunday Visitor He brought along the collection envelopes. He helped to organize things. He was a big thinker. He was a very large-scale thinker. He was watching everything that was going on around him. And he was maturing in this age. I think he became a priest in 1898. So he was living all through this. And he saw when they started this, the original sort of like Department of Education. It was under a different name. But one of the things that they wanted to do was to establish a public school system that would eliminate the presence or mention of God or family in any of the curriculum. And so what they did, I think it was in 1915, out of Washington, they came in and they took over the Gary school system, Gary, Indiana. And one of the things they wanted to do was do a pilot program and to eliminate God and the mention of mother and father and this core family unit from the discussion points of the educational systems. And so they ran their pilot program, and a year or two later, they thought they were ready, and they took it to a larger platform. They took it to New York City, and they broadcast it all across the school system in New York City, eliminating God from the discussion, any mention of prayer, any mention of mother or father, the family unit. It was all about the state, the patriotism, and your reading, writing, and arithmetic, these types of things. And so their civics classes were more based upon, growth and not so much about compassion and taking care of each other, but about, the buildup of the state and the government and, yay team type of stuff. Good energy, but incomplete as far as the rhetoric it was trying to put across. Well, this guy, John Knoll, he's growing up in this, and he's maturing, and he's seeing lots more attacks coming against the Catholics again. And what they did was, instead of taking the person-to-person and town hall type approach to shutting down Catholics and demonizing them and devaluing them, they went to the print media. And there was a guy named William Randolph Hearst. A lot of you may have heard of him. Well, William Randolph Hearst started what they called these yellow rags. And the term yellow rag comes from the Yellow Kid, who was a cartoon character, impish kind of street urchin in New York City that would come up with some pretty clever sayings that became popular in these newspapers. Well, William Randolph Hearst was one of these guys that used the Yellow Kid to say what he wanted to say without him having to say it. And but then they got into attacking Catholics and Catholic culture and trying to dehumanize Catholics as being bloodthirsty vampires and demons of the night, these types of things, dark, predatory creatures who can't be trusted. So this became very popular. It sold a lot of papers for him. It created this alternate universe or culture in our world that was angry as hell against Catholics and wanted to do everything it could to shut them out and destroy them. So there was a battle that was going on, and this was previous to World War I, starting out. So John Knoll says, well, I can't really fight them without the right tools. So what he did was he started a publishing house in Huntington, Indiana. And so he started printing a publication called the Sunday Visitor. And he started writing articles fighting back and trying to explain to the rest of the world what it is that Catholics truly believe, to eliminate the nonsense and the folklore type of things, and then to try to put forward what it is that Catholics truly believe. And this was not only helpful for the Catholics who needed to understand, they needed to know what their rebuttals were going to be when they got attacked, either in the stores or in the street or wherever it was, at work, that they had something to kindly fall back on and not create more anger and hostility in the world, because there was enough of that already. And so He started the Sunday Visitor. It quickly went national. It was very, very, very popular. And it did a great job in sort of knocking down this nasty rhetoric that was coming about and getting people hurt and killed and otherwise defamed and put out of business. So the 1920s are going along, and he's growing with that, and he's taking on the role. He became bishop here in Fort Wayne, South Bend. So he not only had the two cities to deal with as far as the growing of the churches, he had to deal with another big problem that goes with the Fort Wayne, South Bend diocese. That's Notre Dame. The University of Notre Dame is in South Bend, Indiana, and it falls under the administrative direction of the Fort Wayne, South Bend bishop. So imagine being the bishop, not only having to deal with the influences coming into University of Notre Dame with the rise of the popularity of communism in the intelligent ranks as far as the university academics. He also had to deal with sort of the lunacy going on with some of the thinking inside the priesthood itself of people in these little think tanks, and how disturbing that they could be sometimes when they think they're doing the right thing, but they go off on a tangent that ends up leading to decades of formative destruction that goes on with future students or priests. You know, you get a diseased priest in the head, you know, they're going to have a 50-year run of spreading bad thinking. So we have to be careful about these things, and he was being very careful about it then too. So the 1930s come along, and I know I'm brushing through things pretty quickly here on the timeline, but I'm just trying to give a background here because Alex is going to come in and he's going to do the deep dive on this, but it helps if you got sort of a primer for this going into it. So the 1930s come along, and in 1933, we get a president by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Franklin Roosevelt comes along, and if you thought Joe Biden and his administration was bad, FDR was sort of the beginning of that. And he was really pushing for the labor unions and the teachers' unions and everyone to be unionized and blah, 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 because that was where the strength was of the power in his administration. They used jobs, they used the power rankings to be in charge of things. That was their currency. And that was how the Democrats really took hold of this dependent society that we've grown into today. Almost 100 years later, we have, women and children being married to the government and not to their fathers. The fathers are out of the homes, and women are trying to do it all, and with the government's help and assistance, they become dependent, and they're not flourishing. You have an outlier story every now and then. Somebody breaks through and does well, but that's the unusual circumstance. But we need to encourage more of that. We need more breakout people. Well, anyway, John Knoll is going through this same issues, but they kind of got turned up a notch with FDR's administration. So Father Knoll, or Bishop Knoll at this time, is doing a lot of thinking, and he's trying to figure out how to present his thinking of how to save this country, because he saw it diminishing. He saw it being destroyed right before his eyes, because he is such a forward thinker. He said, this can't endure. This is no way that this can last, how this can be any good. So he comes up with a book, and he prints it out in 1940, previous to World War II, I'm sorry. And the book is called The Decline of Nations, Its Causes and Cure. And it was written by John Francis Knoll. And in this book, he talks about how, the intersection, if you will, of politics and culture and religion and ideologies that are forming, how they all come together. And if it's not properly manipulated or controlled or put into of things, that the nation will fall and it will be destroyed and it will fall upon itself. And he goes into numerous historical evidences of these things, of how nations have been destroyed, and also how nations have faced this imminent destruction but survived in spite of themselves. And so he talks about its causes and the cure. And one of the things he talks about as the cure for this, or the main thing he talks about the cure for this, is the spirituality of the nation, what its ideology is. Because when the government or the nation puts the spirituality to the side, and remember, this country, this continent was founded on a very, very deep spirituality and belief and faith. So much so, the original investors in this continent, besides the American Indians, were typically out of Spain and Italy, the voyagers coming over, and they always brought the Blessed Mother in the form of the Immaculate Conception with them. And they were always figuring if Mary is Jesus' mother, he can't let her be alone. Jesus will always be with her to protect her, and by protecting her, they're protecting us. So it was kind of convoluted. They always had Jesus as their main goal, but they took Mary along as sort of like the backup, floaty, if you will, the wings, for the learning to swim, that we have a backup plan in case we get tired or get hurt. Mary's there with us, and she'll bring Jesus, because Jesus won't let Mary down. So they had a deep faith and a wisdom in the love that went between Jesus and his mother Mary, and also how these two were permanently intertwined together and can't really be separated. And this is something I hope that our Protestant friends can come to realize, at least in some way, that there's a beauty to this, and it's not an affront to their thinking, but it's something that they need to possibly consider and realize that Jesus was a man too, and he had human thoughts. And he loved his mother. We should too. If you don't love your mother, you may not get that. And I know there's a lot of people who don't have a good relationship with their own mother, but I'm sorry about that. But we can try to help you too. So just try to follow along. So now Noel is talking about this in 1940. And he is having to go back and review from back in the mid-1800s when the Democrats, especially the Southern Democrats and even the Northern ones, joined in with the forming of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, everyone seems to think that the Ku Klux Klan was only against black people. They were against Catholics. And they were against, Catholics were an easy target because they had decided that Catholics were below whites on the gradient scale. So if you weren't Slavic or you weren't German in your ancestry coming from that area, you were less than the rest. And so you weren't regarded and you weren't given any sort of place at the table. You were given the scraps, but you weren't given the full banquet. So this whole thinking of the KKK had come through with the democratic thinking all the way through. It survived the Civil War in ways that got stronger after the Civil War because these guys were pissed off. And they had lost the war, and they weren't going to lose this one, though, the ideology. So they got stronger, and they started getting more members. And so they were taking on not just the dark-skinned people, they were taking on the Catholics. And boy, don't you dare be a Jew. Oh, man, you were going to be in trouble there. You were going to have a hard life. So Noel had kind of experienced all this as a young boy in the 1870s growing up and then watching all this, kind of mature itself. He had said, we have to fix this. So he comes out with this book called The Decline of Nations, Its Causes and Cure. And you can get this book on Amazon. You're not going to get probably the original. You'll get a reprint by a guy named Kessinger who goes and he scans old books and things like that and reprints them back out there. So there might be a few oddities and inconsistencies in the copies he has, but you'll get the gist of the book. I think it's like $34 on Amazon. but it's really funny because when I touched base with Alex Fiato the other day, I asked him, because I hadn't seen him in about a month, I said, what you been doing? He says, oh, I've been doing a lot of stuff with family, running the Shrouded Turin exhibit around and trying to get people ready for Easter. And I said, oh, that's great. I said, what have you been reading? He says, we got to cover The Decline of Nations. I said, oh, by Noel. And he goes, yeah. And I said, oh, my gosh. I said, I'm glad you're on that, because I was, in my own thinking and discoveries, I was kind of along that same path. So it's kind of a good confirmation that Alex was already on this, where I was sort of getting into as well. So this might be one of these Holy Spirit setups. I'm not sure. But with this Decline of Nations book, we're going to get into this. And this really talks about how society gets broken up. It gets broken into classes. There becomes the bad guys, and they point the finger at these people. They dehumanize them. They bring them down. And then there's no sense of spirit about God and allegiance to God and his wisdom. It all becomes about man and their science. The dude was talking about this right before World War II. Now, why didn't it go much further after that? Well, World War II broke out, and there was a crisis, a worldwide crisis. So a lot of people's thinking was taken off of this. But one of the things that still happened even during World War II is you'd have these propaganda films. And Noel even talked about this. There would be these, rah-rah, movie theater, the newsreel type of things. And they would show our brave boys going to fight in the war and all like that. And they would show that there would be Catholics in the trenches. There were Jews in the trenches. There were these guys in the trenches. But they never showed the black guys in the trenches. They couldn't get past the Ethiopians in the room. And they never valued the black contribution to soldiers. The black soldiers have been screwed since they were Buffalo soldiers after the Civil War. They were just really always kind of diminished. But at least the Catholics and the Jews were getting a seat at the table at that point, so it was sort of showing some progress. And this is one of the reasons why the Catholics and the Jews were some of the biggest proponents of the blacks in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. These guys came back from the war and they said, no, we fought along with these guys. These guys, were there with me. They're men too. They're patriots. And so the veterans came back with a little bit different ideology. Not all of them, because it's hard to break these stereotypes. But in a lot of the marches, there was a lot of Catholics and Jews who were marching along with the Dr. Martin Luther Kings. And a lot of that is not talked about. It's disregarded because, Catholics have got their problems and everybody's got their problems. But we got to work through these things, and we have to live long enough to learn from our elders. So take a little time to look into this, The Decline of Nations, by Father John Noel, its causes and cure. And I think what you're going to find, if you even look into the explanation or the rundown of what the book is about, if you're looking it up, I think you'll see there's a lot of things that are going on today in our world that are very much the same in the pattern that we went through in the 1930s, which led up to World War II. My fear is that if we're leading up and we're doing the same things we did in the 30s, it led to a problem, and it ended up with a war on a worldwide basis. And we're going through it again right now. What's the natural conclusion to that? Is World War III imminent? What's going to start it? Who's going to be devalued? Who's diminished? Who doesn't matter? A lot of things are changing right before our eyes. We still have an opportunity to put our thumb on the scale. But we need to be careful about what it is that we support, which types of causes that we want to make a part of our lives. You are what you eat. And sometimes you become what you think. I love you, and I'll be back.